welcome in everyone. Kevin here inside of the dog trainer community. I'm super lucky. I got one of our clients, Jace from JAO Dog Training, today with me. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about his business and like how things have been going, and just kind of Jace, overall your experience working with us. So first off, why don't you just kind of kick it off? Tell everyone a little bit about yourself. How you got started with dog training.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm only half of JO dog training. My partner Atticus is the other half, but he's busy today, so it's just me. I got started training dogs about 5 years ago now. I started out with my own dog, originally being just a family dog, and then got my own golden retriever, who I still have. And I started working with him, teaching him fun things. Like, he had a nice heel, he had a good down, he had some of the more pet fancy things per se that people like to see. So then friends started asking more about, like, oh, your dog's well trained, can you train my dog?
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I wasn't charging at that point in time, and then it just kind of came further from there. Started small with friends and family, and then they referred their friends and family, and then within about that year it had become kind of its own business.
Yeah. Oh, we're getting Atticus coming in here.
Maybe
we might get an Atticus sighting.
Maybe he's busy, so I don't know if we have a chance.
But I was going to say that's an awesome story, because so many people start out that way. Hey there, how are you? It's good to see you.
Good. How are you?
Good. We're just recording a client success interview here for you guys. So we're just talking about how kind of like Jace got started with training and all that good stuff. Why don't you tell a little bit about yourself and like how you kind of got involved in dog training?
Around the same way, like I had always been interested in dog type stuff, sports, everything like that. And then I'd started training my own service dog. And then she washed out. So then I got a dog specifically for a service dog and did everything self-trained, and then kind of got into the world of, well, I'm interested in this. What else could I be interested in? Sports specifically. So then I started doing smaller scale sports like barn hunt and duck diving and stuff. And then I started progressively training more. And then I trained my first client dog with a family friend's dog, which was a human aggression case.
Oh,
and
wow.
reactive. So kind of intense.
Starting off nice and easy.
Kind of intense. But that's because of dogs like that and how I started off. I'm mainly interested in aggression cases, whether it's human aggression, dog reactivity. I like the intense stuff because seeing the before and after and how they turn around by the end, it's very rewarding. Yeah. And seeing like the owner's life change. And so it's kind of started off like that. I had a first really intense client dog from a family friend, and then I started branching out more professionally and actually training dogs and getting more into it.
That's very cool.
I didn't know.
Yeah, I love that. So both of you guys have like a very similar story in that regard, which a lot of trainers do, which is like, I just started out like helping some people out, and all of a sudden it kind of snowballed into all of a sudden people being like, hey, can you help me? You help my friend, right?
Yeah, basically.
And then you actually have to get professional.
Yeah, and I love that. I feel like that's somehow some of how like the best businesses are born, just kind of out of like almost necessity, where people are just kind of start hearing about you and you do a good job and word of mouth spreads and stuff like that. But Jace, you and I had a conversation probably close to a year ago now, about like getting started working together. And I know timing is everything in life. And so originally it wasn't like the perfect timing for everything to fall into place. But what was it for you that kind of like led you to like reach back out and feel like, hey, I want to kind of like check in with Top Dog Advertising and see like kind of like what we can do here?
Right. So I'd known about Google advertising for a long time. I'd known that it was an option, that it was something to potentially explore, but I was always hesitant to spend the amount of money that I thought it would take to do it right. And I knew if I was going to invest the amount of money into it to try to do it, I wanted it done professionally. I didn't want to try to do it myself because I just don't know enough. So we kind of got into a point in business where we'd have good business for a month, and then we have nothing. So we'd have just enough to get kind of caught up, and then we'd be back down to like square one. And it made it hard to look forward with bigger goals, whether it was things like buying a house, replacing things on our car, different things. It made it hard to plan because there was no consistency there.
Yep.
So I looked at a couple of different options. I used Bark for a while, which I know we talked about. And then I'd gotten in touch with a couple of different people for advertising and had a couple different video calls and intro calls. And then I kind of thought on it for a while. And there were a few things everywhere else that had kind of put me off. Just different interactions where I felt like either what I was asking for wasn't being taken seriously, or like it was just very much so transactional. Like, okay, pay me, I'll do this for you, and it's done. And that was one thing that I liked a lot about what you guys had to offer, was that it was more personal. Like when we talked, the couple times we did talk, it was very personal. Like, yes, I want to help you. We can figure this out, and here's what we can accomplish. I also liked that you showed me the back end of everything, which was something I hadn't seen. Like, I got to see all of the pieces of everything before doing it myself, and that was a big deal to me.
Oh, cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And so, like, yeah, just going back to something you were saying before, because I know this is the experience for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that roller coaster of emotions and just business in general, where 1 month's really good and the phone is ringing and everyone wants to sign up, and then all of a sudden it's just crickets, right? And like nothing's coming in. Yeah. And that's a really painful place to be, because just as soon as you feel like it's starting to go, all of a sudden it just kind of like comes to a screeching halt. And so, you know, I that's why I think that having Google Ads running is such a powerful thing, because what I always say to everybody is you're typically going to trade one of two things to get more business inside of your company, right? You're going to either trade your time to go out and like meet people, shake hands, kiss babies, and like introduce yourself to people, or you're going to be like, hey, let me get a software or a system in place that just brings leads to me, right? And so with that being said, like you both of you took to this very quickly right out the gate, right? So like both of you were very much so the type of clients where it's like, as long as we can just get you leads, you're happy and you're off to the races. And obviously we talked a little bit about sales in the beginning. You guys, you know, had calls in the beginning about, you know, programs and pricing and stuff like that. But with that being said, like, why don't you just talk about your experience, like when when the ads went live and like kind of how things went, if you can kind of put yourself back to like, you know, where you were then.
Yeah. So right up when we were set to put the ads live, we'd put them for, I think it was like a month out that we planned to start them. I was waiting actually for a payment from a client dog that was supposed to have gone home to be able to afford to pay for the jump start on the ads. So I was, and then when the ads first went live, I was nervous. I was afraid basically that if it didn't work, that would be the end of our business. And Atticus and I had actually agreed, like, okay, we're going to give it one last shot to try to make this actually work on a full bigger scale. If it doesn't work, we're quitting training dogs and we're getting regular jobs. So
no pressure for me, by the way. No big deal.
So obviously it worked out, but when the ads first went live, it was a lot of at first just trying to capture everything that came in. Trying to pick up the phone every time, get in touch with people right away, and then sort through who was actually serious or who was just like looking for prices and basics. And then once we kind of figured that out and I started figuring the system out and everything, then it all kind of settled from there. And now we've got a pretty good routine going, and it hasn't been a problem to pay the monthly advertising or anything since. We've been able to upgrade some other things business-wise as well that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
That's a tricky thing. That's a really scary leap of faith that you both took, right? Where it's like, I've even had people say to me, like, I know this is what I want to do. I feel like I haven't gotten the opportunity up until this point, and I've seen what, you know, you've been able to help other people do, and I'm between paying you and paying my mortgage for this month. I'm like, okay, that's where it starts getting a little bit strange for me, because I'm like, again, no pressure or anything like that. But I just, you know, I in a way, I have nothing but respect for that, because like it just goes to show, like, if you want something bad enough and you're willing to like really take that risk and that leap of faith, you can end up with something very, very fruitful on the other side of that. And absolutely. So like, what was your first month like? How did that, because I know sometimes people like in the first month, they just focusing on getting the return on their investment back and getting the proof of concept. And then into the second month, that's where it really blossoms. Some people in the first month are like, hey, we added 20K to our business. What was it like for you guys for first 30 days?
For the first month, my biggest priority was making sure that then I could afford to pay the advertising for the next month.
Yeah.
I knew like I needed enough just to get enough out of it to pay for our handful of bills at the time that we didn't have enough money set aside for, and to pay for the advertising at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And I think we did. At first, I wasn't screening evals a lot over the phone. Anyone who wanted to schedule, I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. So I jumped right in with that, and we did like 5 people in the first 10 days, I think. And the first 4 evals did not book. And I think now, thinking back on it, I think with the advertising knowledge I've gained from you guys and from more experience, I could have sold at least 2 of them.
Yeah. It's funny to look back on that now and be like, I could have closed that person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then the 5th eval that we went to, it was a little reactive dog. Her name was Willow. She's actually a very sweet dog. And I did the eval. And at the end of the eval, we were talking about options. And I kind of presented her our different training programs and made a recommendation on, hey, I think our 3-week program is good for your dog. I'm explaining why. And at that point, the owner, she was like, okay, I want to do this, but the dog wasn't up to date on her rabies vaccine. And there were a few things that needed done first. And she's like, so I'll get in touch about scheduling. And I'm like, well, what about here? I know a clinic local to you that can get this done in the next couple days. Why don't we, I know, like, I just did a walk-in here this afternoon. If you call them, they'll get you in. And why don't we just get a time on the schedule? And then if we need to change it, we can. But I want to make sure I can get you guys in. And then she was like, okay, let's do it. And that little bit of push from me was enough to get her to go like, okay, good. And then she put the deposit down at the eval, and then I picked the dog up like a week later. But just that bit, as well, of willingness to push clients a little bit, is something that took those first 4, I don't want to say failures, but essentially clients who didn't book to get to that point of confidence. Like, okay, if you don't book this and pay me, then I'm not paying my bills this month. And then
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to cut you off there.
And then after that, it all kind of settled, and just that bit of confidence was enough to push that forward in the next few evals, and things continued to go well from there.
Yeah, I love that. You know, there's something to like just repetitions for everything in life, you know, and you can't skip that phase, you know, in the beginning. And what I always say to everybody, and because I think it's really important to be totally transparent about like the different types of leads you're going to get in your business as well.
Yeah.
When you start running Google Ads, they are a little bit different, right? Like these are not people who are coming to you saying like, you trained my sister's dog or my friend's dog, and we already know that they did the 4-week board and train and it's $4,500, but we want to do the same one. Like that is a very much so a lay down sale. And it's not that that doesn't require no salesmanship, but a lot of the time, like that's just like picking up like a check and processing a payment and stuff like that. Whereas with like doing consultations with somebody who just came off of an ad on Google and is like, hey, I'm calling around, I'm trying to figure out who is the best fit for me. Taking that person and getting them to buy like a high ticket program. So what have you found to be the best like strategy in your business as far as like Google leads and just like, you know, your methodology?
For over the phone or in person?
Well, walk us through your sales process in general. Like when a new lead comes in, how are you guys handling it?
So when I get the notification that a lead's come in, whether it's a call or a form, whatever it comes in as, I do my best to get in touch with people as soon as possible, which in some cases does take me a day or 2 just to get back, because there's usually a couple people that I had to get back to first. Once I've got people on the phone, I usually start out basic, like, hey, how are you doing? And then from there, ask a little bit about like, why were you calling? What prompted you to call? What's going on with your dog? Where are you guys at, basically? And from there, as people start to explain, some people really open up over the phone and start like, we'll talk for 5, 10, 15 minutes about what's going on and how they feel about it and everything. And some people need more kind of prompting and almost babying along to get them comfortable enough to talk over the phone like that. So,
hey, real quick, what are some of the questions you ask? Like, how do you get people going? How do you get people to spill their guts? Because that's a really good thing for people to know about.
Yeah. So typically over the phone, like I said, first thing I ask is, how are you doing? Just basic, open that up, like person to person. How was your day, basically? And that usually right away kind of loosens people up a bit. And then from there, I ask like, hey, what's going on with your dog? From there, I usually get some short answer. Like, oh, my dog is reactive with people. My dog is barking at strangers coming into the house. My dog is pulling on the leash. And then they're all usually kind of like, okay, well, can you tell me a little bit more about this behavior, about how old your dog is? I try to start gathering some information. Usually I'll answer dog's age, a little bit more about behavior. Sometimes there's little things that I'll hear while the people are talking that'll kind of catch my eye. Like, for example, last night someone called me with a young, I think like a year-old black lab, and was explaining to me like, well, on leash, she barks at other dogs all the time. But as soon as she's off the leash, she's totally fine. She's never been aggressive. So I kind of prompted a bit more into that. Tell me about your dog's interactions with other dogs. Do you have other dogs in the house? Is your dog around dogs off leash or on leash more often? Tell me about your routine, just kind of diving into that a bit more. And then from there, we talked for like 20 minutes on the phone. But usually I try to get them first to just tell me a bit about the dog, whether it's age, breed, or breed mix, or just something specific to the dog, how long they've had the dog. And then I'll try to get them to open up from there with a bit more specific details. People, from what I've seen just in the last few months here, but also throughout the last about 5 years, is when people start to get more open and more almost emotional about things, they're more likely to move forward with something. When they feel like they have some kind of connection with you over the phone or in person, that makes them feel like, wow, okay, this is handleable. We can deal with this. I don't have to be worried about this for the rest of my life with my dog.
Yeah, and and if it's the best is it's authentic, because sometimes I feel like there can be almost this like connotation where it feels like you have to make people feel this way, right? But it's like you have to make them feel that way because it's the truth, and you do genuinely,
absolutely,
right? Because if you're just going out there trying to like tug at their heartstrings and make them, just say whatever you want them to say, just so you can get them to so you can make the sale, it's not gonna, it's not gonna work, But I want to go back to something for a second, just because I've been listening to some of your calls. Just because whenever someone is doing very well, I always like to kind of see like, hey, what are the patterns and what are the similarities between this business and other businesses that are succeeding and stuff like that, and just like little nuanced things. So first and foremost, when somebody calls, you always answer the phone and introduce yourself by name and the name of the company. And I think that is something that can often get overlooked. And I notice this a lot of times with like newer clients that they have never run a business before, and they don't even, they just kind of overlook that because they're like they almost have like a freelancer mindset, and somebody calls them and they're like, hello, it's like, then the person's like, hi, is this a dog training company? And it's just like, oh yeah. I'm a dog trainer. How can I help you? And you just don't start off on the right foot. So right out the gate, you do that very well. Like you answer the phone, introduce yourself, name of the company, and then ask them how they're doing. Like, I think that's brilliant. I think that's a really good idea. And just how's your day going? How's your week going? Because that's just the first way to kind of like start building some sort of trust with them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And honestly, that's not something that I would have even thought about if you hadn't mentioned it. Like I know at first and at times still answer the phone and I'm kind of like surprised someone's calling, like, hello. But the majority of the time I answer like, hi, this is Jace with JO Dog Training. Like, how are you doing? Or some kind of opening just to get people kind of, first, this is who I am. This is who you're calling. And then what can we talk about next?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through like a coaching and mentorship program a couple years ago. For sales and a couple other things, but it was like a sales thing. And I remember thinking back on it and feeling like, man, I really want to work with these companies. Every person I've spoke to here has been like really cool and fun to talk to. And it's all intentional. Like the first person I talked to, I remember the guy's name, it was Matt. And I was ready to start asking him questions about, how does this work? What does the cost look like? All just like the basic questions everyone's going to have. But he really made it a point to be like, hey, how's your week going? Like, what are you up to right now? Like, oh, cool. I'm actually out in Vegas on a bachelor party. He was like telling me about that, and he was funny. And it was like a funny story that he was telling me and stuff like that. And it's just an interesting thing because it's so easy to slip into the mindset of like, I just got to get down to business. But if you can take just a quick beat to be a human being and be like, how's your day going? Oh, where are you from? Oh yeah, I love that town. I love that area. You know, we
Yeah.
go over all the time to that restaurant over there. Like whatever you can do to connect with somebody on something other than like, let's start talking about how you're going to pay me money.
Yeah.
It just goes so much better,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that, but it's not something I would have thought of if you hadn't mentioned it that way.
Yeah.
Even if it's something I try to practice, then it's not
Yeah.
something I would have thought more about. So that's
Yeah.
for
It's
sure.
funny how that works. But
Yeah.
so yeah, and let's get back to like your sales process a little
Yeah.
bit. So you connect with people over the phone. You kind of ask them how they're doing. Tell me about your dog. Tell me why you're calling. All that good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then like, what are some of the qualifying questions that you're asking before like you know that hey, this is a good candidate to go do a consultation with?
Usually when I'm talking to people and they're very right away open about the dog, they want to
Yeah.
give me information about the dog, they're receptive to whatever I'm asking, and they're just into talking. Like the
Yeah.
more that people seem to want to converse, even just over the phone, the more likely I feel like they're to be not just committed to like paying me, but also committed to their dog.
Yeah.
I've had clients come through and call that were actually like, okay, I'll give you my credit card on the phone. Like, let's get this scheduled, let's get this done, but
Yeah.
not super interested in the actual process with the dog.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like that's just as important as paying me money is that you're committed to the dog as well. I
Yeah.
don't want someone to come and spend 5 or 6 grand on a program and then the dog goes home and nothing is done.
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's an injustice to the dog, and I think that it's just unfortunate. So I try to
That's how you
stay.
get refund requests too.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yep.
how you get somebody who's like, the training didn't work. And you're like, it actually did. Because if I were to be with your dog right now, they'd be doing everything I was asking of them.
Yeah.
But you just are not, you're not the one who got trained, you know?
Yeah. And that's sometimes I'll ask, depending on the vibe I'm getting from people over the phone, sometimes I'll ask, dude, like, what is training? What do you think training looks like? Like,
Yeah.
what does this look like for you? What is this ideally for you? And sometimes I get answers like, oh, you come once a week and train the dog, and the dog is trained. And
Mm,
sometimes I get answers like, I'm willing to do whatever you need, whatever the dog needs. Like, let's get this going.
yeah.
Whatever needs to happen, I'll make happen. I've had clients take days off of work to do evals or pickups or
Wow.
drop offs or lessons. And then I've had clients who canceled last minute because they're like, oh, I just forgot. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
definitely a scale there for
Yes.
appreciation, not just, of course, of our time, but also of the dog. And I think that that's
100%.
important to look for and acknowledge as well.
Yeah, and there's a fine balance because I know we
Yeah.
all love committed clients. There's nobody better
Yeah.
than when you're running your business with a client that comes in and they just want to do everything that you want to show them. And they're just a gold star student. They do their homework
Yeah.
and it's all perfect, you know? But that's not everybody. And so like, some
Absolutely.
people like it seems to me that you're very good at getting people to talk, getting people to open up and building relationships with them. So it's not like if somebody doesn't open up to you right away, like you're abandoning ship on that. It's
Yeah.
like you just kind of like let that conversation unfold over a longer period of time, right?
Yeah. And that's, I try to prompt what I can and get the information I can out of people. But
Yeah.
then at the end of pretty much every call, I still ask, like, if you do want to move forward with scheduling an evaluation.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the answer is yes. Even if the client didn't seem super committed over the phone, unless there's some specific red flag to me, then I'm
Mhm.
probably not going to turn them down on scheduling.
Yes.
I try to get whoever wants to be involved.
Yeah.
And then what it looks like from there kind of varies. Some people don't move forward with the evaluation. Some people cancel. Some people never pursue after the eval. But then those people that do book at the evaluation are usually pretty good clients overall.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's the saying in sales that people buy from people that they know, like, and trust. And
Yeah.
so the easiest way, the most effective way, forget easy,
Yeah.
think about effective. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? The most effective way to get somebody to know, like, and trust you is like being able to get face to face with them and be
Yeah. I
able to
agree.
like smile at them, shake their hand, look them in the eyes, and tell them stories, listen to them. Like that's the
Yeah.
biggest thing is listen to them. Ask them the questions. So many times people go out or do a sales call, and all they do is just talk, talk, talk.
Yeah.
And the most effective salespeople a lot of the time are the people who are doing exactly what you're talking about,
Right.
which is like prompting with the right questions and getting them to tell you what's going on, because that allows them to self-sell instead of you just trying to persuade them. There's a big difference there.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. And I
Yeah.
think some clients are more so like into it like no matter what, and some people you have to convince.
Yeah.
Like when we started out training, me and Atticus each started separately, and then like 3.5 years ago, we started training together. And at that point in time, we were doing in-person evaluations, and we were going out and working with people. But at the end of the eval, then we'd have worked with the people, and we'll tell them like, okay, we'll email you a quote in the next day or two with more information.
Yeah.
It kind of took the personal aspect out of it, and then after that, it kind of left it open-ended. Like, okay, then this person can respond or not. There's nothing happening in the moment. They have a couple days to think it over and decide, like, okay, maybe find somewhere else. Like, it just leaves it very open.
Totally. Yeah. Strike while the iron's hot, you know, like when somebody is like giving you any sort of green light to proceed, you know, like it's always just about like, hey, let's get you started right now. So talk about the difference there. Like, what do you, because I remember from one of our original conversations, you also, I believe, mentioning to me, like, how do we strike that balance between giving value during the consultation and not also like turning it into a training session?
Yeah. And that's, sorry, I have a puppy. But yeah, and that's something that's become kind of a balance over time. The more that I practice it, the more I've kind of figured out where do I draw the line between this and evaluation and this situation. Typically, my intent with the eval is one, to fully evaluate the dog and figure out what's going on to the best of my ability within the span of about an hour, but also to connect with the owner and figure out what is important to the owner. As we talk about goals and behaviors, one, I want to see the dog's behavior. So I'll go through a couple of different things with the dog that I think may prompt the behavior, if it's a behavior I think is safe and reasonable to prompt. Then we'll work on some basics. People absolutely love door manners. I don't know why, but that has been one of like our biggest, easiest probably selling points on programs. I'm like, I can teach your dog door manners right here in about 5 minutes. And it's something that I don't think is unreasonable to sell per se in an eval, because it's pretty simple to work on. And then once I've shown them like, look, your dog can't demonstrate this level of control, they're like, wow, what else can my dog do?
Yeah.
We'll also usually work on a little bit of, I'll usually put like a slip leash on the dog. One, I don't want the dog getting away from me if I'm handling the dog. And two, I like teaching the dogs a little bit of leash pressure. When people start to see like, wow, my dog can have impulse control, my dog can focus, my dog can stop pulling, it kind of opens up a whole other level of potential for wanting to move forward.
That's really well said. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that seeing is believing, and it's very different saying to somebody, hey, I can help you. Yeah, theoretically, we can fix all these problems, versus somebody seeing within 5-10 minutes you fixing problems that they've been dealing with for years potentially, and going like, whoa, something is very different here from when this person interacts with my dog versus when I'm doing it myself. You know? And so like, how do you draw the line? Because I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with, between like, where is that line for you, Jace, where it's like goes into like all of a sudden a full-blown lesson? Like, where do you kind of cut it off and say, hey, this is kind of where I'm willing to go, but anything past this, it just turns into like a lesson, and then they're going to start feeling like asking me more and more questions about like how to fix behaviors?
So when we get to the point where I've had hands on the dog, if the dog is safe to handle, I've worked through these couple of basic exercises, I've shown the owner, look, we can do this with your dog, here's how it looks, then I'll usually have the owner take the dog back, and I'll be like, okay, then we'll go ahead, we'll go back inside and we'll talk. Sometimes at that point, then people are like, oh, well, what do we do next? And then I don't try to dismiss that per se. I don't want people to feel like I'm just brushing that off, but I also want it to be like, okay, we have to figure out next steps. So I'll kind of explain like, okay, well, this is our starting point for most dogs, these kind of basic things. And these are things that you can even continue to work on at home if you want to. Just in the little bit of time I've spent here, I've shown you pretty much how to do it at home. And that's fine. But if you want to go further, we start getting more in depth. Each dog works differently. There's foundations to build on from here. So from there, I'll kind of talk with the owners then about like, okay, let's go inside. You can have your dog back. I'll usually try to make it some kind of joke about it. Like, okay, I promise I won't steal your dog. Here you go. And just hand the dog back over, let the owner walk the dog back inside. We'll go inside, we'll talk. And then I'll kind of ask them like, okay, what did that look like to you? how did that feel? Does that make sense? And I don't get a whole lot of prompting for further information past that. Sometimes I will, but most of the time, if I'm getting prompting for more, it's at the very end after we've gone over programs and people are like, yeah, I'm not moving forward, but how do I fix this anyway? And at that point, I usually tell people, like, as professionally as I can't continue to give you more information unless we continue to work with the dog. And how I phrase that varies a little bit client to client.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard people even just say something like, listen, you know, at this point it would just be kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem. And I just don't want to I don't want to do that to you right now. And like I think that like the best thing to do is really to proceed with like an actual program so we can address like the actual root causes of these behaviors.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what throughout the eval, we explain to people, like, okay, this is some basic foundations. This is us giving you an idea of what training is going to look like. Then people tend to kind of accept that pretty well.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is what the start of training looks like. And then from here, we'll just kind of take it as it comes. Like everything.
I want to go back to something like a little nuanced thing that you said, because I think it's really, really important. And it's funny that you said this, which is you're like, I make a little joke of it. And, you know, it's the way I almost look at it, it's like my brother is, he's an actor, but he was a stand-up comic for a long time. And I always found it so interesting whenever I would go to watch him perform and I'd heard him tell jokes, you know, but all of a sudden he would tell it a slightly different way. And all of a sudden, like, it was much funnier this time around and it landed just better with the crowd all around this time, you know? And it's really funny. Like when you do this long enough and you really figure out during a consultation what works and what doesn't, it's kind of like refining a routine in a way. Not that you have a script and you say like exactly the same thing, but you just learn, like, when I say this, it makes people laugh. And as cringy as I think it sounds coming out of my mouth, because I've said it 5,000 times, like it makes people laugh. And I know that it's going to work well. Like I have a client, Lucas, who he said to me one time, you know, I hope he doesn't care me saying this. I'm sure he really wouldn't, but he's like, I get down on my knees and he's like, I will call the dogs like a fur baby. He's like, I don't even like that term. I just say it because I know like all like the people in this area eat it up and they think it's funny coming out of my mouth because he's like a super like tough, like built guy, you know, and it's just like silly. And he realizes that, but it's just like he knows he's got his spiel and his routine, and it's almost like a stand-up comic, like refining it over time to get it to a point where you're just like, I just know that this lands really well with people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's then once you kind of have that routine almost that varies a bit client to client, then it tends to make the eval go pretty smoothly.
Totally.
I try to throw in some jokes, some kind of humor throughout. Whatever it looks like varies a bit client to client. Most of the time it lands pretty well, and sometimes people are just like, okay, whatever. But
that's showbiz, baby. He can't win them all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, like what I always think is incorporating humor, or if you don't think you're particularly like a very funny person, you think it's going to be inauthentic, like find out your way of being authentic. Like there's a lot of people out there who, when you really boil it down, they're scared. They're actually scared of their dog's behavior, or they're like scared of what this is going to do to their marriage if they don't get these problems resolved. And so like you can kind of take that angle and just be really empathetic with people. And again, like from a really honest, truthful, and just like, like just truthful place. Like this is not something that's conniving or you're just acting or something like that. You're actually caring about them, and you can see how this is affecting their lives negatively, and you can just empathize with that. And that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of like the flip side of it. Like you have the humor and the fun part of it, and then some people they have more serious concerns. There's something where it needs a more empathetic approach. And we've had that. We've come into clients' house where they're afraid of the dog, or they're afraid of what the dog will do, or there's more of fear and anxiety there. And in that case, then I usually spend more time focused on talking with the client, hearing them out, listening to the dog's history, listening to their concerns, listening to their fears and their worries about what the dog's done, what the dog may do. I just want to kind of figure out where everything sits with them. And then from there, I can kind of either empathize or figure out like, okay, well, here's what this can look like. and
Yep.
give them an alternative to think about. And once you kind of
100%.
plant, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say real quick. I just want to go back to something we were talking about before, just because I
Yeah.
had a thought on this that, you know, if you can get people laughing and like over and over and over, and you're just like, that's like connecting, right? Like people laugh with friends, people laugh with like their siblings, their parents, whatever it is, because like there's a
Yeah.
real connection there, and like that's a really really solid way that human beings like get to connect with each other is like laughing over like common inside jokes and stuff like that, and so like that's a great thing. And if you can get somebody really laughing or really like crying, not that I
Yeah.
want to make people cry, but like
Yeah,
you
of
know what I
course.
mean, where like they're so emotional over this and they're just telling you like I've had people tell me like I'm scared that like if I don't fix my business that like this means that I'm going to have to give up on my dream that I've been
Yeah.
pursuing for the last decade. Right?
Yes.
And so like if I can connect with people over there because I've had that fear before myself and like I can see where you're coming from, but we can
Right.
fix this. We can make this better. We can
Yeah.
get this thing going. Like that is leagues above. Like forget sales. Like the sale can almost become a foregone conclusion at that point if people
Right.
like can really put their trust in you enough to really voice those concerns to you, you know?
Yeah. No, and I agree with that completely as well.
Yeah.
And just touching back a bit on kind of where we started with starting ads and everything like that, I was
Yeah.
always a skeptic. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to advertising of any kind. I've
Yeah.
always been very word of mouth or posts in local Facebook groups, that kind of thing. So the idea of spending a lot of money on ads was foreign to me, and
Yeah.
I did not believe it. For one, I didn't think it would work, and even if
Yeah.
it did work, I didn't think it would work well enough.
Yeah.
And so then it was definitely very it it opened my mind a lot when I saw everything that you'd been able to show me back end for
Yeah.
everything. And then as far as what you've been able to do for other people as well had kind of given me the confidence per se to move forward with it. And I'm
That's
glad that
amazing.
I did.
I love hearing that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's all this stuff on the internet and you see these offers out there like, we'll run your ads and we'll 10x your revenue and stuff like that. And like you just see people commenting on it like this is a scam or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And what I always find interesting is like, listen, I've had people say to me like this is a scam, this couldn't possibly re-roll. I'm like, it actually is, but
Yeah.
there's no magic wand, you know what I mean? Like it's not the type of thing where it's like, hey, Top Dog Advertising runs ads, and you just sit back, and all of a sudden you're a millionaire. Like, there's work that needs to go into it, and that's the thing that's beautiful about it, and is actually kind of freeing when you realize that like most people out there don't want to have to do that work. Most
Yeah.
people out there don't want to have to take that risk. And so if you're the person who's willing to take the risk, you're the person who's willing to take that like leap of faith and do the work, you're just going to absolutely eat their lunch because they're not going to be able to compete with you.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely as well. And that's one thing that's bothered me actually when I've seen people make comments, whether it's on your post or other posts, like, oh, this is a scam, this can't be real. Like, what you don't understand is it's not just advertising.
Yeah.
It's just not. The ads are ultimately they are a small piece of the puzzle here. You have to be willing to sell yourself. You have to be able to sell yourself. You have to be good at what you're doing. And you have to be very dedicated.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to call people often. You have to be willing to text. You have to be willing to stay in touch. And then that's even before you even get to the training the dogs part.
Yeah.
And then after training, there's post-training support. And I mean, you can pretty much, from what I've gathered at least, you can make as much with it as you want to, or you can let it just kind of fail.
Yeah.
Like, you can do a lot with it or you can't. And I think a lot of that comes down to individual motivation. Like if you expect it to sell itself and to just basically be here's your money, you're paid for it, then you're not going to get anything out of it. But if you see it more as an opportunity, then there's a lot to discover there. And that's just something that's frustrated me with seeing a lot of the comments like, oh, this is a scam. Like, it's only a scam if you think of it that way. It's not.
Yeah.
Like,
I appreciate you saying that because it's no different than dog training. You know what I mean? Like, this didn't work. This person scammed me. It's like, is that the truth, or did you just not do anything? Did you not upkeep the training? That's a very different thing. Like if you don't call your leads, you're gonna have a really hard time like making sense. I
mean, people aren't just gonna text you off the leads and be like, oh, I have $5,000. Where do you want me to send it? I mean,
Yeah.
there's more work that goes into it than that. But if you're
Yeah,
willing to put the
absolutely.
work in, the business is there. It's just a
100%.
matter of figuring it
Yeah.
out. I mean,
And I'm so glad you said that,
yeah,
because again, it goes back to what I was just saying before too, about like it's actually a good thing, because when you realize, like, if you're actually honest with yourself and I'm like, if I can do what I'm supposed to do here,
yeah,
which is what, like, listen, we're not asking you to like send a rocket ship to
yeah,
Mars, like we're talking about like answering calls, setting consultations, following up with people, like you
yeah,
said, texting people and not getting discouraged. So, I want to hear more about, like, let's go. I want to talk about your results and like where you guys are at today in a second. But I just want to go back to one of the original things you said, which is like you booked 5 consultations, and it wasn't until the fifth one that said yes to you.
yeah,
And now you look at it and go like, oh, I could have closed that person. I could have closed that
right,
person. Now I understand how this works. But there's a lot of people that, forget 5 consultations. They do one and the person says no.
yeah,
And they're like, this doesn't work. And, no one's serious about training. Nobody wants to put in the
yeah,
work. No one wants to spend any money. And so there's a lot of mental resolve that goes into running a business. And I think that's something to really pay attention to, and like your own
yeah,
thinking, and not getting so emotional over just one no or two no's, or in your case, 4 no's, right?
yeah,
Because it's like all of a sudden the tide's got to turn, and all of a sudden people got
right.
to start saying yes here.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
There's, you can give up or you can keep going with it. But the more
Yeah.
that you put into it and the more you are willing to kind of persevere, almost, the more you'll get out of it. And
Yeah.
it doesn't always go the way you expect. We have weeks where I may do 4 or 5 evals and nothing comes of it. But
Yep.
the last 3 evals we did all sold programs over $5,000.
Yeah. So sometimes I
So
get messages for you, and you're like, I sold
yeah,
$9,000 worth of dog trading today,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Which is just crazy, but that's how it
yeah,
goes. Sales
exactly.
and business in general is such an interesting thing. There's nothing that will really test you quite like this, because when you're hot, you feel like, man, I could sell ice to an Eskimo.
Yeah,
And then other times you're like, I'm never going to make a sale again. I'm
yeah,
done. Like this business, it was good while it lasted, but it's over.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just not the truth. It's so cyclical. It comes and goes, and all of a sudden you have a really good day and there's a rough day, and that's why you just got to get steady, be steady-handed. And as
Yeah,
my wife always loves to remind me, never get too high with the highs and never get
yeah,
too low with the lows, because it just is as it is, and it always kind of like comes in waves.
yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that completely. You have to kind of balance yourself. Like I know, just thinking on that note, like when Atticus and I got our first big paycheck at the time, like 3 years ago, like
Yeah,
3.5 years ago, it was like a $2,000 paycheck. And we were like, wow, this is the most money either of us have ever had.
we're rich.
Yeah, we went and spent like $900 to the local pet store, like
Yeah.
that day immediately. And then we
Mhm.
were just like, oh, well, we'll make more. And then, but from since then, we've balanced out a lot.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to get caught up in like, wow, that's a lot of money. I want to spend it. Or
Yeah.
like, wow, I'm not making enough money. This is hard. And
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
at it more balanced, it's definitely easier to handle.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, where with more money comes more money, more problems, right?
Yeah,
Like it's true in certain regards, where like money is an amplifier, and if you have bad money management skills, like you're gonna be if you're bad at managing $1,000, you're gonna
yeah,
be equally as bad at managing $10,000. And I
yep,
know, to anybody who's listening to this who's like, that's easy to say if you're not in that situation, but take this as it's intended, which is just like pay attention, because I've seen people that like are making nothing and they find a way to get through life off of $2,000 a
yeah,
month, or nothing some months, you know what I mean? And then all of a
yeah,
sudden, like they have a month where they make 10 grand and 15 grand, and at the end of the month they still end up with nothing.
yeah,
And it's because, like, just as you make more, you have expense creep, and before you know it, you're like, you found a way that hey, I even though you don't need to, because you got along with it without it, I needed to buy these new Rufflin kennels, or I
yeah,
needed to buy a new car, or I needed to move, or whatever it
yeah,
is, or like, and so it's just live beneath your means, like always, and
yeah,
find a way to stack money, because it's good to have a war chest. You never know when you're going to
yeah.
need that.
No, I agree completely. But it's easy to get caught up in like, wow, I made 10 grand today.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's easy to
Crazy to
get caught
think,
up.
isn't it? 10 grand in a day. It's
Yeah,
mind blowing. Yeah.
it is. And it's especially like our prior to when we started working together, the highest price program we'd ever sold was for 2 dogs. It was a 4 weeks each. I think we sold it for like 5,200 total.
Yeah.
And that was a couple years ago. And other than that, then once after now we kind of started working together here, we sold a $9,450 program. It was like a month ago now, maybe a
Yeah.
little longer, but both dogs are in training now with us. So
Insane. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's why we spend so much time with our clients on that too, because
yeah,
I noticed that people are like, can you help me with my pricing and my programs? And,
yeah,
we have a call, everyone who comes in does a call like that with Angel and stuff like
yeah,
that.
and that was great. That was very
Yeah.
helpful, actually. With
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so this is why we offer so much more than just like, hey, we just send you leads, because
Yeah,
I've paid marketing agencies in the past years ago, and that always killed me, that I felt like there was a disconnect between being a marketer and being a
yeah,
business owner, and understanding that like just because you got me some visitors to my website today doesn't really mean anything. That visitors on my website doesn't pay the bills. Like we need a
yeah,
return on the investment. And so
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that with you right now. So like Jace, for you, like what is an average month looking like right now for you guys, like revenue wise, if you don't mind sharing that?
Um, I've been counting it more by the week here because our months have been kind of blended together.
Yeah.
But I know I'm just thinking off the top of my head. In the second week of August, we took home, like, actually in our bank account was like 4 grand, and then the last week of August it was 9,600 and something, just
Wow.
from payments that week, not sold. Just
Yeah.
that was the money that was put into our account that week from a
Yeah.
couple of different dogs and a couple of different things. There's 2 private lessons dogs, and then I think 2 board and trains,
Yeah.
um, and then 1 boarding dog, I think. So it was a little spanned out, but that was the money actually in that week, not just sold.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
cash collected is a very different thing. But I mean,
yeah,
if you guys are doing 4 grand on, in a week, like in sales and stuff like that, and some months are going to, some weeks are going to be more than
yeah,
that, some are going to be less than that. But if you average that, 4.3 weeks in a month, like I mean, so you could be sitting anywhere between 15 to 20K in a month.
yeah, and I'd say that's pretty accurate right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Some
And you're very picky, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean it in a really good
Yeah,
way. You had said to me when we started this call, you're like, we get to kind of decide what we want to do at this point, which I think
yeah,
is the most amazing thing of all of this, is like the money's a really good yardstick to use. Like you can measure with that super easy, but
yeah,
a really good like way to look at a business is like, what kind of freedom does it give you as well? And so if
yeah,
you can be like, hey, I'm taking some time here to chill out because I've just had like all these board and trains, that's a
yeah.
really pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, it is for sure. And that's like we have 10 days scheduled off at the end of October, and we're fully booked until then. And
Yeah.
then after that, we have 2 people already signed up, deposit paid, ready to go when we come back to work. But the ability to schedule off, like, hey, we want these 10 days or we want
Yeah.
this week, we can kind of move things around. Or even like week to week. I usually schedule our evals from like week to the next week, like within about 2 weeks.
Amazing.
And when I do that, I'll pick a couple days off for us to
Yeah.
stay home with our dogs, for us to go on adventures with our dogs, for us to spend more time with our board and trains, whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. But I can kind of nitpick what I want to do. And then from there, I can also kind of nitpick the kind of clients I want to work with,
I
um,
love that.
which is a big freedom to have for sure. I don't
Yeah.
have to work with someone that I feel like is going to be either not committed or disrespectful to our time.
Yeah.
I can move that on, which is nice for sure.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's a really getting more leads is all around to me such a good thing, because it fixes more than one problem. It
Yeah,
obviously fixes the problem of like, now I have people to sell to and I'm making money and stuff
yeah,
like that. But the other thing too is it allows you to be like, if I just don't want to work with this person, like I don't have to operate from this scarcity mindset anymore of like,
yeah,
I just need to make the sale because I need the money to put food on the table this
yeah,
week,
exactly.
Yeah. And so being able to be like, yeah, they're not really a good fit for me. I'm gonna choose to turn them away. Like you get to take the clients that you want to have, which that's a really good sign of like a healthy business, is like
Yeah.
you being an active participant in who you actually want to work with.
Yeah, and that's a big deal to me. I didn't like, for a long time, I felt like there were clients that I had to work with in some way that were disrespectful, whether it was towards us or our time or towards their own dogs or their own time. And that's just not what I want to be doing. So it's not something that we have to be doing anymore, which has been a
Yeah,
big thing.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
but even as we draw towards like the end of evaluations, when I start talking about people like, okay, this is how much it's going to cost, this is what's going to look like, I can also weed people out there.
Yeah.
Like I've gotten to the end of a couple eval. I got to the end of one eval, And I'm like, okay, let me go grab program info. And they were like, no, we're not interested. I'm like, all right, then we're just done. And she's like, well,
Yeah.
actually, give it to me. And I'm like, I think this is okay as is, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
We're good. I'm good
yeah,
on this. Yeah.
there's levels of respect for sure.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. I mean, that's a really weird thing because like if you're in a place where you need more business, it feels like, man, like I can't afford to turn away business, but
Yeah.
there's different ways you can operate a company, and it's very easy just to let everybody control you. And that was something that I realized along the way. Like I've turned some people away because I'm just
Yeah.
like the things you're saying, the things that you're kind of like bringing to light here, and the way
Yeah.
that you talk about other people, and like our version of this is like when somebody comes to me and they're
Right.
like, I've worked with 4 other marketing agencies and nobody's been able to help me. I'm like, I'm probably not gonna be able to help you either because like it's not the marketing agency. It's kind of you, you know, like you may want to like look in the mirror. And it's not that sometimes people can't have bad experiences. And like, of course, I take that all into account. We've had people that have come to us and that's been the case. And
Yeah.
they pay people money and just not gotten leads.
Yeah.
But whenever like there's that sense of like not willing to take accountability for yourself at all, and it's like you're just like fix all my problems.
Yeah.
That's not how this works, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that completely. Like
Yeah.
we get calls all the time. Like I went to another dog trainer and they told me my dog's a lost cause. And like I'm like, okay, well, we get enough of those that your dog's probably not a lost cause. But let's
Yeah.
figure this out. Let's eval, let's go out from there. And then I get calls that's like, oh, I've been through 20 trainers. So I had someone actually legitimately tell me they'd went through 21 trainers and name off a couple of people that I know personally are good quality
Yeah.
trainers. And they're like, none of these people helped me. It was all a scam, and I don't want to pay any more money for training. I'm like, I can't help you either. Then
Yeah.
if you
Yeah. I
can't help
know.
yourself, then I can't help you.
100%. Yeah. Well, listen, I've had you for coming up on an hour here, so I just
Yeah,
want to ask you one last thing, and then I
yeah,
promise I'll let you get back to your day. But I just want first off, I want to say thank you for your time because
yeah.
this has
Thank
been
you.
super helpful for me, and like it's an honor and just a privilege to be able to work with you guys and watch you grow your business and be a part of it. And obviously you guys have got an incredible return on your investment. If you're
Yeah,
making 10, 15, 20K on a month, like
yeah,
you're making a really, really solid return. And it's crazy to think about like being able to put some money into your business and
yeah,
within 30 days, like be able to get that money back, in
yeah.
multiples.
Absolutely.
And let me ask you this, like putting yourself back in the shoes that you were in a couple months ago before we got started. And like when you were like, man, this is a leap of faith I'm taking here.
Yeah.
Somebody who's in that situation now, like what is the advice that you would give to that person?
For me, like thinking back on it, me and Atticus, we talk about it a lot. Actually, it makes me like sick to my stomach to think about that we were in a position for so long when there was something relatively simple that we could have done to completely change our lives, and it did.
Yeah.
And I would always say, do it, like as much so as you can, even if it means putting extra money aside for a little while, go forward with it. And I wish I'd gone forward with it years ago, but as long as you're willing to put the work into it to make it work the best for you as possible, then I think it's absolutely worth doing. And if you're not sure about like, hey, I don't know if I can make this work, I think it's always worth reaching out and asking, like
Yeah.
getting in touch, like, hey, here's what I have to work with. Can you guys work with me?
Yeah.
And that was like, of course, what I came in with, like, hey,
Yeah.
I need help. I don't know what to do. And then we were able to work everything out.
Yeah.
And I feel like people are just hesitant to take that first leap when,
Yeah.
especially if they're in a position where they feel vulnerable. And that's
Yeah.
how it was for us for a long time.
Yeah.
So I would always
100%.
say, try it, do it, see how well it will work for you, because it does work, but you have to be willing to put the work in yourself too. I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
training dogs.
Yeah. Very similar. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Well, listen, let's wrap it up here for today.
Yeah,
Hang on the line for one sec, just because I want to go over something real quick after I hit the stop recording button here,
yeah,
Jake.
sure.
But I just want to say thank you so much. And again, it's an honor to work with you. Just a great experience, like working with both of you guys and just watching you grow this thing. And right out the gate, like just knowing like, okay, this is really going to work.
Yeah,
And so if you guys got some value out of this call, like do us a favor, drop a like on this
yeah,
video,
absolutely.
drop a comment down below. And if you have any questions, drop them down below. I'm sure JC would be willing to probably answer a couple questions for somebody if they were to do that as well.
Yeah, of course.
Not to put you out or anything, but I'm going
Yeah.
to anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, cool. All right, well, listen, we'll end it here, but we'll talk very soon, guys. See ya.